Oh, we're on. We're on and we're live. Okay. I will call this meeting to order. So we've got a copy of the agenda in front of us. Any changes? If not, Councillor Ferguson.
Motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. So we've got a number of public hearings there tonight. But before I get into that, I should start with a land acknowledgement. And I will say, in the spirit of respect, authenticity, and reconciliation, the town of Slave Lake honors and acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional lands of Sawridge First Nation within the Treaty 8 territory, home to Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have occupied these lands since time immemorial. We'll start with our first public hearing, which is for bylaw number 18. So I will declare this public hearing open and state this hearing is held pursuant to sections 230, 606, and 692 of the MJ 2000 as amended. The purpose of bylaw number 18, 2022 is to amend the municipal land use plan map of the MDP by redesignating lot 1, block 11, plan 5521 KS 401 3rd Ave Northeast from residential and general urban to downtown. The notice of this hearing was given in writing to the applicant, the assessed landowner or landowners, and adjoining landowners, as well as the planning and development officer. The notice of the hearing is advertised on the town's website from December 14th to January 24th of this year. Presentations will be brief and to the point. The order for hearing and presentations will be planning and development, followed by those in favor of the bylaw, those opposed, and any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. Anyone coming up to give presentations, please state your name and address when you come to the mic. So we'll start with planning and development.
Hey, your worship and members of council, the purpose of this report is for council to hold the required public hearing and consider second and third reading for bylaw number 18. The applicant is Lakeview Optometry Clinic and the landowner is Philip Loken. Subject lands plan 5521 KS lot 11 block, lot 1 at 401 3rd Ave Northeast. So the proposal is to amend the municipal land use plan map of the municipal development plan by redesignating the lands from residential and general urban to downtown to facilitate the expansion of the Lakeview Optometry office. The bylaw received first reading on December 13th, 2022. Currently, the subject lands maintain a residential and general urban designation in the MDP, as such an amendment is required. Currently, the subject lands maintain an R1 standard detached residential districting in the land use bylaw, and as such an amendment to the LUB is required. So as an amendment to both the municipal development plan and the land use bylaw are required for this application, they are being processed concurrently. I just want to explain briefly, a non-conforming use is a use of a building that is not listed within the land use district where the building is located. In this instance, the optometry business is not listed as a use in the R1 standard detached residential district. In accordance with section 12 of the land use bylaw, a non-conforming use of land or a non-conforming use of a building can be continued if that use is, however, if it's discontinued for a period of 6 consecutive months or more, any future uses of the land or the building must conform with the land use bylaw that is in effect at that time. Non-conforming buildings cannot be enlarged or structurally altered in any way. The Municipal Planning Commission reviewed this application on its January 9th, 2023 meeting. They've indicated their support for the bylaw. Referral letters were sent to adjacent property owners and required referral agencies on December 19th. The Municipal District of Lesser Slave River has responded, indicating they have no concerns with the amendment. No other verbal or written comments have been received. I just wanted to comment that the merits of an individual development application are not what's being discussed this evening. It's land use zoning, and that any application going forward for development must meet with all the requirements of the land use bylaw. What we're talking about this evening is whether or not the zoning makes sense for the area, what the potential impacts are to neighboring properties, will the proposed districts or uses fit well, and so on. So a little on the discussion. The applicant is in the process of acquiring the above noted parcel of land in an existing building so that she can expand the Lakeview Optometry Clinic. Currently, the subject lands are designated residential and general urban in the MDP and R1 in the land use bylaw. As there is a commercial use operating on the lands and the use is not listed, it's considered non-conforming. In accordance with the bylaw, non-conforming building and use cannot be altered or added to. So in order to expand the Lakeview Optometry Clinic, the lands must be brought back into a state of conformance with the land use bylaw. These two plan amendments will accomplish that objective. There's two options for council. Either give the bylaw second and third reading to enact the bylaw or defeat the bylaw on second reading. Yeah, and that's all I have so far. Any questions?
Questions from council? Councillor Adams.
So in this area that we have that we're going to commercial, there's no other commercial areas around that, correct?
That's correct.
It's right in the middle of a residential area.
That's correct.
Okay, then with the zoning it is, or under the rules under C1 zoning rules, what kind of boundaries do you need to have between your buildings and the residential properties?
There's no, there's setback requirements for commercial buildings on the lot,
Right,
but there isn't anything in the regulations stipulating that there has to be a certain distance between a commercial building and a residential building.
I thought it was different if you have a commercial lot against a commercial lot than it is a commercial lot.
If you are
against a
going to build zero lot line, so if
Right.
the side yard setback was going to be nil, adjacent to a residential lot, then you wouldn't be able to do that in all likelihood. You'd have to, if you could get it approved, you'd have to fire rate the building. But that's not the case in this instance. The
Yeah, but
existing
we're
structure.
talking about zoning, we're not talking about the instance, right? So we change this to C1. We could do a zero lot line building if I got a, because it'd be approved use.
It's talking about future use.
Oh, okay.
So
Sorry.
all of a
I
sudden
didn't
it
get that.
becomes,
My
all of a sudden it
apologies.
becomes an empty lot.
Could
Right?
they
So-
build a zero lot line? If they could, if the MPC approved it and if they could meet the building code requirements, yes, I suppose it's a potential. I'd have to look.
If it's,
Right now, there are stipulations in commercial district. If it's a commercial building adjacent to a residential, there are some bigger setbacks. So no, they wouldn't be able to build zero lot line.
but they could still stick up the 30-foot tall sign.
Which?
A 30-foot tall sign we can put into a C1. So is that still? Any rule that's in that C1 is now we can do here in this.
Yes,
One lot in the residential spot,
yes.
potentially.
Mhm.
Okay.
But there is, like I said,
Well,
there
that
are,
wouldn't be MPC because it's.
there are
it's an approved
required
use.
setbacks.
It's not discretionary. Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions, comments? As I see none, at this point, I'd ask anyone in favor to come forward and speak. Anyone in favor? State your name and address for the minutes.
I'm Dr. Eve Niedergesäß. I own and operate Lakeview Optometry Clinic at 401 3rd Avenue in the Northeast. I have the opportunity to purchase the current building and expand my clinic, so I would be taking over the entire building at that point. We're operating currently there. I've been practicing there for 8.5 years, but law and optometry have been there for several decades already. We have adequate parking for both staff and patients, so there's no overflow into the community currently. Daytime hours, Monday to Friday. And my plan is to do a full interior renovation and significant improvements to the exterior of the building and improve the curb appeal as well.
Okay. Questions? Comments? Councillor Ward.
I was just gonna make the comment that I think that's great for the neighborhood. I know it's odd because the commercial building is in the residential, but for me personally, I think that makes sense, especially given the parameters of your business. The Monday to Friday, I think was, and when we were on MPC, same thing. The Monday to Friday was definitely consideration and the adequate parking. Everyone's always very concerned about parking around town, so the fact that you guys have sufficient is good for me.
Yeah, and we're happy with the location in terms of proximity to the hospital. That's been good for us as well.
Okay. Other questions, comments? As I see none, I just have one. Eve.
Mhm.
Honestly, at the end of the day, I honestly have no issue with an optometry building being there. I think it's fantastic that optometry expands. You know, that use has been there for a number of years, and I got no issue with that. The problem is that when we change it to a C1 zoning, that's not the only thing that can go there.
Mhm.
And we lose control over some of the things that could go there, where all of a sudden the neighborhood doesn't totally agree. So the reason that we have to do this, because you're legally operating right now, it's just not it's a non-conforming use. And so realistically, she can't expand or renovate in the building until we bring it into a conforming use.
Right,
Okay,
which is the issue, because I feel like the building needs some TLC and I just haven't been able to do it based on what the current bylaw is. And I
Okay.
do feel like it's probably the best case scenario for that building, because if I don't expand and don't take it over and Mr. Loken's looking to sell it, like, what are the options then for that building? There's
Right.
not a lot other than residential, and better for it not to be unoccupied.
Okay. Other questions, comments? As I see none, thank you very much. At this point, I'd ask anyone else in favor of the bylaw to come forward and speak. Anybody else in favor of the bylaw? Going once, going twice. Anybody opposed to the bylaw that wishes to come forward and speak? Anyone opposed? Going once, going twice. Anybody deemed to be affected wishes to come forward and speak? Going once, going twice. As I hear and see nothing, I will declare this public hearing closed. So next we will move into number 19, which is kind of a continuation of the same piece of property. I will declare this public hearing open and state this hearing is held pursuant to sections 230, 606, and 692 of the MGA 2000 as amended. The purpose of the bylaw number 19/2022 is to amend the land use district map, the land use bylaw number 22/2007 by redistricting lot 1, block 11, plan 5521 KS 401 3rd Ave Northeast from R1, a standard detached residential district, to C1 downtown commercial mixed use district. The notice of this hearing was given in writing to the applicant, the assessed landowner, and landowners, as well as adjoining landowners and the planning and development officer. The notice of this hearing was advertised on the town's website from December 14th, 2022 until January 24th, 2023. Once again, presentations will be brief and to point, or to be brief and to the point, and in the same order with planning and development, followed by those in favor, those opposed, and any person deemed to be affected. With that, I will turn it over there. Lori, and I get a full report. Was there anything really new to add to this?
No, this is, like you said, this is the second part of the application for Lakeview Optometry. And so everything else is the same with respect to the non-conforming use and the requirement to do both amendments to bring the building back into conformance.
Okay, any questions for Lori? Councilor Adams.
I should have asked this last time, but it ties into the same thing. When I'm reading the land use bylaw for how it works for the non-conforming building, if they're not adding to it structurally, there's no need for a change. It can remain non-conforming if the renovation is 50% of the value of the total value of the building.
No, that's not how that reads. It's if the building is destroyed to more than 50% of its value
75,
above or
yeah.
75, they can't put it back. However, if it's a non-conforming use, you can't expand it, period. It doesn't matter if it's 50% or 5%, it can't be expanded.
Well, you can't expand, but you can renovate up to 50%.
You can do minor renovations. You can't even do any major structural change to a non-conforming building. Yeah, but you can do minor renovations. What they're talking about is not minor, and it's also an expansion of the use to fill the whole building instead of just part of it. So it doesn't meet the threshold for a non-conforming building without being brought back into conformance. The reason that's done is so that it does two things. It protects the use that's operating. It also it ends the lifespan on the building so that eventually you can bring the property back into conformance. So that doesn't exist forever, so to speak. So it does two things there. It allows you to continue, but it puts an end date on it, so to speak, so that eventually you can bring the building back into conformance.
Okay, other questions, comments? As I see none, I'll move on to anyone in favor that wishes to come forward and speak. Anyone in favor? Going once, going twice. Anybody opposed to the bylaw that wishes to come forward and speak? Anyone opposed? Anyone deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard? Going once, going twice. I will declare that public hearing closed. As we have a number of public hearings here tonight, we'll jump into the other ones here next. Just a reminder that I should have touched on this beginning. So for process, the way this would work, we do all the public hearings. We have a number of other things going on, other reports. And later in the meeting, we would actually debate the item and make a decision on it. You're more than welcome to stay for all of it, but I just wanted to let you know that it wouldn't pop up for a while there as we go on with the rest of the meeting. So we'll jump into our third public hearing of 4 tonight. So I will declare this public hearing open and state this hearing is held pursuant to sections 230, 606, and 692 of the MGA 2000 as amended. The purpose of bylaw number 16, 2022 is to amend the land use district map of the land use bylaw number 22, 2007 by probably supposed to say redistricting lot 19, block 12, plan 897 NY 305th Street Northeast from R1 standard detached to R2 medium density. The notice of this hearing was given in writing to the applicant, the assessed landowner, landowners and adjoining landowners, and the planning and development officer. The notice of the hearing was advertised on the town's website from December 14th to January 24th. Presentations will be brief and to the point. The order of presentations will be planning and development, followed by those in favor, those opposed, and any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. So with that, let's turn it over to you, Lori.
Okay, your worship and members of council, again, the purpose of the bylaws for council to hold the public hearing and consider a second and third reading for bylaw 16-2022. The applicant and landowner are Métis Urban Housing. That's 305th Street Northeast, plan 897 NY block 12 lot 19. The proposal is to rezone the subject lands from R1 standard detached residential to R2 medium density residential district. The bylaw received first reading on December 1st. In accordance with the municipal land use plan map of the MDP municipal development plan, the subject lands maintain a residential and general urban land use designation, and as such an amendment is not required. The Municipal Planning Commission reviewed this application at its January 9th, 2023 meeting and have indicated that they support the bylaw. Referral comments, our letters were sent and the public hearing was advertised. We received one verbal comment. After discussing the application with this individual, he indicated that he had no concerns with the development as long as the semi-detached dwelling was developed or constructed in accordance with the regulations of the bylaw, which it would be. The bylaw, only one plan amendment is required. As I had stated, the landowner wants to develop a semi-detached dwelling on the site. The parcel in question is larger than a standard residential parcel, being 60 feet by 140 feet. And the landowner is confident that they can build a semi-detached dwelling on the site that will meet with the regulations for the R2 district. And that's all I have right now.
Okay, any questions for Lori for planning and development? Councillor Adams.
I'll fire one out. Where's the nearest R2 from here even?
There is the neighborhood to the west, immediately west is R2. So this would be considered an extension of that zoning and not spot zoning.
Okay.
You can see that on page 26 of the report. Schedule A of the bylaw shows the R2 zonings that back onto that.
Okay, other questions? Okay, at this point, I'd ask anyone in favor of the bylaw that wishes to come forward and speak. Anybody in favor? Or just a reminder to state your name and address when you sit down, please.
I'm Jason Thompson. I'm manager at Métis Housing for the maintenance area, and I've done a few renovations in town here already. That property there, that unit is unlivable. So I want to change it so that we can build something there so we can put people in it. So they can have a decent home, right? That's about it.
Okay,
I'm just trying to get things done, so.
we'll jump into some questions then. Any questions or comments? All fire. So the idea is that you're gonna get rid of this house and put in like a duplex or something.
Yeah.
Instead.
Just there's room enough for it, so. On
Okay.
that lot.
And why a duplex and not just what was there before?
So that we have another house for another family.
It's a very large lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
At this point, then I'd ask anybody opposed to the bylaw to come forward and speak. Anyone opposed? Sorry, I should be asking if there's anyone else in favor that wishes to come forward and speak. Anyone else in favor? Anybody opposed that wishes to come forward and speak? Anybody opposed? Any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard? As I hear and see none, I will declare this public hearing closed. Okay, so the next one is for bylaw number 17, 2002, which I have to remove myself for. And Councillor Adams will take over at this point.
Perfect. All right, I declare the public hearing open and the hearing is held pursuant to sections 230, 606, and 692 of the Municipal Government Act 2000 as amended. The purpose of bylaw 17-2022 is to amend section 87(3) of the land use bylaw number 22-2007 by adding self-storage facility as a discretionary use to the C1 downtown commercial mixed use district. A notice of the hearing was given in writing to the applicant and assessed landowner or landowners as the planning and the planning development officer. The notice of the hearing was advertised on the town's website from December 14th, 2022 to January 24th, 2023. Presentations are to be brief and to the point. The order for the hearing presentations will be one, the planning and development officer, those in favor of the bylaw, then those opposed to the bylaw, and any persons deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard. All persons giving presentations are to state their name and address before they start. Lori, Development Officer.
All right, your worship and members of council, the purpose of this report is for council to hold the required public hearing and consider second and third reading for bylaw number 17-2022. The applicants are 2020 Investment Group, Inc. What they'd like to do is amend section 87(3) of the land use bylaw, which is the C1 downtown commercial mixed use district, by adding self-storage facility as a discretionary use. The bylaw received first reading on December 13th, 2022, and the Municipal Planning Commission reviewed it on January 9th, 2023, and have indicated that they support bylaw number 17. The applicant's in the process of acquiring the parcel of land with an existing mixed commercial residential building. In order to increase the economic viability of the site, they would like to add a self-storage facility. Subject site is located in the C1 downtown commercial mixed use district, and currently self-storage facility is not listed as a use. In accordance with the land use bylaw, the definition for self-storage facility means a use where goods are stored in a building where the building is made up of separate compartments. Each compartment has separate access and may be available to the general public for storage of personal items, and may include the administrative functions associated with the business, and may incorporate custodial quarters for the custodian of the facility. The public hearing was advertised as well. No referral letters were sent, as this is a regulatory amendment and not a redistricting amendment. To date, we received no verbal or written comments with respect to the application. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have a
Councilor
couple,
Ferguson?
I have a couple questions for you, Lori.
Sure.
So if this is potentially added as a use, what would the design guidelines be around it? So for example, can someone bring in a bunch of 10x10 sheds on skids, or what mechanisms are in place to ensure that someone wouldn't be rolling in an unsided sea can or something like that?
Right now, there's regulations within the land use bylaw that doesn't allow sea cans to be placed in commercial districts unless they are enclosed completely within a building, essentially. So you can do that, but you have to enclose them. And any kind of facility that would, the use doesn't dictate the standard for the building, it would be considered a commercial building. So it would have to meet the same setbacks, same guidelines. So they wouldn't be able to bring in. Right now, the commercial districts limit the number of accessory structures you're allowed to bring in as well, and limits the size.
Okay.
So you wouldn't be able to do that either.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving on, I would like to call now those in favor of the bylaw to speak. Anybody? No. Those opposed to the bylaw? And any persons deemed to be affected who wish to be heard? And we're done. Declare this public hearing closed.
Okay. We will jump into the rest of our agenda. So on page 37 in our package, we've got the minutes from November 15th. Any issues or changes to those minutes? Councillor Ward,
I'll make a motion to accept the regular meeting of council, November 15th, 2022 minutes as presented.
any discussion? Call the question, those in favor? It is carried. Question period, opportunity for council to ask any questions CAO at the moment. That are of burning interest. Going once, going twice. Okay, we'll jump into reports of new business. So the first one is bylaw number 18, 2022. Lori, anything new to add? Reminder to council and the public, we're talking about the optometry clinic.
Yeah, I just wanted to indicate that an optometry office and a law office, I say 15 years in my report, but it's been well beyond that. I just didn't know the exact date. But those uses have operated on the lands for a very long time, extended time, decades in reality. The uses are entirely contained with the building. There's more than sufficient parking on site. And we have I've never received any complaints over the years, nothing documented in terms of the uses occurring on the site and the negative impacts that they may be having on their neighboring properties, neighboring residential properties. Yes, this is spot zoning. But again, I think there's enough regulations within the commercial district that we should be able to protect the adjacent residential uses without creating big problems. And again, it's been there for a long time and not creating any issues.
Okay,
So I'm recommending the bylaw receive second and third reading.
okay. Questions, discussion, opinions? Councillor Adams.
I might go on for a bit here. I got a couple concerns with this one, because it is spot zoning, as we've said. I am not in favor of spot zoning under any reason. I agree that the use it's in now is great there. I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying as far as the interpretation of land use bylaw and what they're allowed to do for renovations. From how I've read it, I'd liked that explored a little bit, but that being said, by putting it into a C1, I mean, we're opening this up to future development. It's not just about what's there now, it's about what could go in the future. This is in the middle of a residential area, R1, R2. And to stick in there, the fat point, we could stick in 30-foot signs. We could stick in, they can have a maximum area of 128 square feet. They, with a side yard, when I looked it up real quick here, you're allowed 3-meter side yard only when it abuts a residential. So we can actually have a 4-story building in there, 3 meters away from a residential home. The minimum height is 2 stories, which this already doesn't comply. If we turn this to a C1 anyways, it's only a 1.5 story. Our municipality has adopted a comprehensive plan for the purpose of stating our long-term planning objectives and addressing the needs of our community. These comprehensive plans map out the types and locations of future land use patterns, which municipality would like to see. These provide guidance for changes in the zoning district maps. The key point being rezoning should be consistent with the policies of our land use designations set out in this plan. This needs to be a broader discussion if a new commercial zone is to be developed in the area or extended from downtown. To pick one lot in the middle of a residential zone as a commercial lot is not a good planning practice. This was originally changed to a residential zone after the police station, if I remember correctly, and was moved, and the intent eventually became becoming residential use again from institutional. There are no abutting commercial spaces or non-conforming uses close to the property. We as a town council need to be cognizant of what we are doing and not bypass our own procedures because of convenience or even to say it has always been there. We run the risk of eroding our public confidence in the transparency of our actions here, and we need to be wary of making changes of not utilizing the procedures we have for reviewing the plan as a whole. we want to look at this as a broader picture, I'm willing to do that, but to do a spot zone, I don't think this is a good idea.
Okay. Other questions, comments from council? Councillor Ferguson.
So Lori, just, I agree. I lived in that neighborhood for, a few years and, the clinic, I never had an issue with the clinic or the law office there. I think it was an appropriate use in the district. That being said, the C1 designation is, in my opinion, probably a little bit intense, in nature for, this parcel of land being in the middle of residential. Was there ever any consideration given to zoning it to C4 neighborhood commercial, instead?
The reason that C4 wasn't suggested is because it has very limited uses. Neighborhood convenience is basically what the C4 is for.
Yeah.
And so those uses didn't fit into the C4. So what we'd have to do to consider that would be to amend the C4 and add, medical health office outpatient to it. And then you could see that use pop up in other C4s as well. But no, that wasn't considered.
Okay.
Councillor Adams.
C4 does have medical and health office as outpatient as permitted uses.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll echo some of the comments that Councillor Adams made, because we got to look at what, in my opinion, what the future development could be. If a zoning change is permitted, we are potentially allowing breweries, drinking establishments, grocery stores, restaurants to open up there. And I understand that's not the applicant's intention right now, but who's to say 5 years down the road, it doesn't potentially sell. And since those uses are permitted, they would be automatically approved, and there wouldn't be an opportunity for residents to have much say in the matter. So that's where my concern lies with this application.
okay. Other questions, comments? Councillor Ward.
Well, I'm not a generic, but generic spot zoning, like spot zoning always seems to be a hot topic amongst council and the preference that we don't want that. I hear the concerns from the other counselors here, but I do think taking into historical context, the usage of this building and its current usage is important. For me, I've always been very business friendly and supporting businesses in our community. This business and the related law office have existed forever in this location with no problems. So we've had businesses in other commercially zoned areas that have had problems. So I think given the historical context, this is really important to consider. So I'm definitely in favor of where it should be there.
Okay, other questions, comments? Councillor Hughes.
Everybody makes some really good points. I think that I would err on the side of what Councillor Ward said as well, though. If we were just picking this spot out of nowhere to create this business here, that would not make sense. But given the historical significance and that it's been there for decades and that this clientele is already used to going there, that they want to, update the outside of the building, all the interior, exterior work, I think that's great. I would hate to see it sitting there unoccupied in future as well. So I don't know that that's enough of a argument for me to not approve this.
Okay, Councillor Adams.
I'll comment again, just to rebuttal that a little bit. Then let's go down what Councillor Ferguson is saying into a better zoning option. Going to a C1 is not the answer. We have more control on a C4 then, or to have it remain as non-conforming. I don't. The fact that one business leaves, I don't believe stops it from, there's no application for the square footage in there according to the land use bylaw.
It's based on use.
Yeah, it's based on use.
When the
It's not
use,
changing the use.
when the use discontinues, it cannot be
That
recontinued.
use is not continuing though. That's still in the same
Okay.
building. Anyways, it doesn't matter. My point being, I'd rather have a more appropriate zoning put here than a C1. A C1 is too much.
Okay, so the impression I have here is that nobody says that this business doesn't fit. The issue is what if? What if this were to change in the future? And realistically, the whole idea around spot zoning is that these non-conformings is that you get out of it. So by putting it back to C1, we're theoretically just kicking this can down the road for another 50, 60 years. So I guess the question would be if C4 was an option, that would accomplish, you know, more control and limiting the amount of uses that could go in there for future uses, but would still allow the current or potential new owner there to accomplish what they want to do for business. Would those two go together?
It sounds like it. I don't have my bylaw in front of me, so if medical health office outpatient is listed, then the optometry clinic could operate there.
Okay. So I'm gonna go a little unorthodox because I can, right?
Mhm.
Can I? So I have a question. Normally we don't do this, and we never do this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So a question, Eve, to yourself. Is that if we were to C4, like theoretically, we accomplish what you need to do to be able to expand the business, whatever, we change the zoning to C4 instead of C1. Does that accomplish what you need to do? And would you be open to that idea? After looking into it in more detail? Go for it. Yeah. Right. Right, but C4 would allow you to do that. Okay, go somewhere else. Agreed. Okay. Thanks. So you wouldn't be in favor of changing? Okay. So I have a question. Go ahead.
We did pull up the bylaw on the webpage. Medical health office outpatient is listed as a permitted use. The other uses that are permitted are retail, convenience, and offices. And then there are a few, those are the permitted.
And there's gonna be some
Okay,
discretionary.
yeah, discretionary or apartments above ground floor, cannabis store. That's interesting. Gas bar, laundromat. Personal services, restaurant, licensed and food services only.
Sorry, that's C4?
That's C4.
Yeah, but they're all discretionary, so they all have to,
Those are all discretionary.
they all have to go through the MPC to be able to be approved.
And then C1 just.
And the C1 though is not discretionary, so they're automatically allowed in there. Okay. Okay. So last question then, knowing those things that are out there, are you still interested in only C1? Okay. Fair enough. So, Councillor Ferguson.
Well, rather than, put Dr. Eve on the spot, should we maybe defer this for a week to give her time to look into it to see if that would be appropriate?
Does that timeline work for you?
Does a week set you back? That's fine. We don't care. As long as you don't care, we don't care.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so. So what I would do is have, okay. So speaking candidly here, there's two options here. One, we stick with the report in front of us. We push the motion and see what happens with the vote and see where you end up. The problem is if you don't get what you came looking for, theoretically, you can't come back for 6 months. Well, I guess.
That's right. That's right. So the better option would be to either make the decision now if you're comfortable, and if you're not, that's fine. What we would do is we'd come back and amend the bylaw again to go from R1 to C4. I'd have to advertise again and set out notification. We'd hold another public hearing and then,
Do we have
Look
to
at-
advertise again?
yes, because this is a completely different concept now.
It's a more restricted concept, but
Yeah, but I have to go through the whole process again. If it's a very minor change to an amendment, that you're amending a bylaw for, you can do it without a public hearing, but this is too substantive. I have to go back and re-advertise.
okay. Okay. So we're gonna have to, well, they could theoretically re-advertise right away. You could come to, when's our next meeting? Come.
What I'd have to do is I've got to amend, unless we decide this evening. So if we decided this evening that we were going to change the zoning to C4 and give the bylaw first reading, we could do that. And then I'd set the date for the public hearing and then away we go. If you're not comfortable doing that though, which is fine, we would have to come back to another meeting, give this, change this bylaw, give it.
It would come to the February 14th meeting.
Yes,
We have
and
the
then
2
we'd
weeks of it.
advertise a public hearing and it'd be held in March.
No, it wouldn't. Why in March?
Well, you have to advertise for 3 weeks,
2 weeks.
21 days to meet advertising requirements on an amendment.
Right, so now it's pushed back till March. Okay. Okay. How do you feel about that timeline? Okay. Theoretically, Eve, it's your application, so normally we would just go ahead and vote or whatever else, but I'm asking because
Well, if we vote and it doesn't go in your favor, like you said, you're gonna be 6 months out.
well, no,
Should you be
theoretically, they
8
could just they pay a fee and do it again and go under
No.
C4.
6 months, right?
They have to wait for 6 months.
Okay.
Well, hang on a second here.
Theoretically, you would just pay. a fee
You're
and
right. If
go.
you, no, it's
Apply
not
for
about
something else.
paying, it's about you can frustrate a council by bringing the same application time and time again. So the legislation puts that in place so that the council isn't making the same decision on the same application over and over. But technically,
This
if
would
this
be the
was
decision.
defeated this evening and she came back with an R1 to C4, it's a different application, same
You'd
property.
have to pay the
So,
application fee.
yes, you'd have, but council could. You know where I'm going with that.
Hmm.
So no, there would not be the 6 months.
Thoughts? Yeah, no, go ahead. You guys go. You know what? We'll just leave this for a second. We'll jump into the next report and we'll come back.
No, that's the two-story minimum is in the downtown plan. And that's not, your site is not within the boundaries of the downtown and Main Street area plan, so it doesn't apply.
It's written in the land use bylaw, is that?
That there is a minimum two-story requirement for C1.
Yeah.
It can't be.
I'd have to look at it.
Sorry, I'm just scrolling here and I'll let you know.
It can't be because you got how many other buildings we got to build?
Yeah,
in
but
town?
those, the rule came in after, so now they're all non-conforming.
You haven't changed to a two-story yet, and I think about Uncle John's Fireworks there, building,
Mhm.
whatever, that's not two-story.
That's not C1 downtown. Or C1,
It's not
What is it?
C1.
isn't that the C, what's that other one, C2? C2.
Interesting.
I might be wrong, I have to pull up.
You guys
the
would
map.
take a minute. You need to do what you're gonna do. Lori's gonna do some peeking in the box there. I'm
Number
gonna
10.
jump into a different report and we'll come back to it. We're kind of all over the place here, but an effort to be business friendly here, really going outside of the box here tonight.
Sorry, guys.
It does say 2 stories. That's a new change with the mixed use commercial. That never used to be there.
So it would have to be two-story.
Yeah, technically. And I know why that's sitting there like that. It's because the design standards dictate that. And most of our C1 is in the downtown,
Okay, so
so impacted by the design standards.
I'm gonna call a 3-minute recess,
You're gonna which?
3-minute recess,
Okay,
so that you can make sure that those people have the right information.
yeah, I'll go talk to them.
Okay. We'll take a recess here, throw some mute, we'll be back. Purpose.
No.
Okay, we're coming back here and our two people are still outside and Lori is,
to see.
well, we need Lori anyway.
Hmm.
So let's wait.
Why don't you do the mayor's update, so we don't have to hear it later?
I don't have an update.
Oh. Okay,
No mayor's corner.
I'll scratch 7 off.
Wow, that's the first time.
I'll think of something. Oh, we're just waiting for our guests to come back here. You know what? I'll touch on Mayor's Corner. The only thing I was gonna say in Mayor's Corner, one item is just reminding the public, for all the people that are tuning in right now and are just like loving this meeting here and are watching it tomorrow or live. Two people right now, sorry, that are live. I would remind people and the public out there, we did a video yesterday, but looking for some feedback on snow removal survey. The survey is out there and hoping that we get some responses. We had some come in the last 24 hours, but definitely looking for quite a few more. I'll also touch on the correspondence then while we're still waiting here. So there's a correspondence there on page 144 in the package from High Prairie School Division that essentially there we've been invited by the Board of Trustees to attend their symposium. Theoretically, council currently doesn't have anything budgeted for this, but it could be something we added to the budget and go from there. As such, I would consider that as part of the budget process that be considered and we go from there. Motion to accept that as information, moved by Councillor Gramlich. Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Okay, so Lori, we're jumping back into bylaw number 18, 2022. And so our understanding here, so we're all on the same page. Theoretically, we've got application for C1. There's been discussion about C4 is a better fit. Theoretically, we would just go, we would not normally discuss all this, but in the effort to work with our business community while we're here and that sort of stuff, we kind of went outside the box here a little bit. There would be a couple of issues with doing this. If we were to consider doing a C4 and the applicant was in favor of that, theoretically, we would have to advertise again for 3 weeks. So this wouldn't come back until the March meeting. The other thing is because it is a new application, it would require new fees. So there's a couple $1,000s in application fees that would be eligible for that. Theoretically, there was another comment about the 2-story in C1 zoning. So knowing that you could go to a 2-story. Right now, our bylaw basically says if we're going to build something in C1, it has to be 2-story. However, in this case, would that apply or not? Because theoretically, this isn't 2-story. We'd be going to C1. If we went with that application, where does it leave us? Sorry, Lori, your mic's off. That's all right.
Could leave the building in the 1 and 1.5 story or 2-story on the one side. I don't know what it is, but anyway, and it would be in a state of non-compliance with the bylaw. That's not unusual when there are zoning changes and amendments.
And-
So that could go ahead that way.
And non-compliance totally different than non-conforming.
That's right.
So non-conforming, they could still change those uses depending on what was going on. Or sorry, in non-complying, they could change the uses, what's going on. The only real big difference between non-conforming and non-complying is that if it's non-complying, theoretically, the building's ever destroyed to 75%, they have to put it back.
Non-conforming, if it's destroyed to more than 75% of its value, you can't. Non-complying structures can have variances issued for them. And once the variance is issued, then they become complying. So you
Okay.
can relax a standard on a non-complying structure. Non-conformance, it's all about the use,
Okay, so
Yeah.
the 1-story, 2-story comment does not apply here at this point.
not in my opinion, no. We can
Okay.
leave it in a non-complying status.
Okay, and so we left it open to the applicant there to give some feedback, but just in the essence of making sure you have all the information available to be able to make a decision possible. I would make my own motion. That I make a motion that I don't even know if we can do this. Lori, what I want to say is if the applicant wants to change to C4, that we don't charge them again, to go through this application process,
Okay, yep,
right? So I can make that motion, correct?
yes,
Okay, so I make a motion that in the event the applicant for bylaw number 18, 2022 and bylaw number 19, 2022 decides to change zoning from R1 to C4, that the fees for those applications be waived. Any discussion from council? Call the question. Those in favor? Those, that is carried. Okay. So with that, do you have all the information that you need? And you have the ability that we can push through and make the decision and kind of go from there, or you can make a change there that you felt maybe better fits for your business or council or the community. Okay. Okay, so applicant has requested that we continue with the application that's in front of us for C1. It was conditional to them bringing another application, so theoretically, they still could bring a C4 application later anyway.
that's right.
Okay. Further discussion on the report. Councillor Adams.
Just since we took a break, I would like to reiterate the challenges that could be faced by going to a C1 and bring that as a reminder. Putting it into the middle of a R1 district does not make sense at all.
Okay, other questions, comments? Councillor Graham.
I agree with Councillor Adams a bit on this, but the part where the part with an existing business that's been there that will work is what bothers me the most. And I understand down the road, the new business that goes there may not work. And a discretionary use for the council of the day to decide if something fits there would be a whole lot better. But at this point, I don't know that there is other things in place. I think, Lori, can you correct me? Like, say they were putting a big store in there, you'd have to have adequate parking spaces. And there are some safeguards in place from a McDonald's going there per se, right? Like it's not just you can't just plop anything up there because it's C1. Is there some sort of safeguard in place?
Well, any of the uses that exist within the C1 permitted and discretionary, especially permitted, they could build on that site, and then it would be up to the developer to meet all the
Yes.
requirements, right? Like they'd have to meet setbacks, they'd have to meet parking, they would have to meet density requirements, the whole thing. And so they'd have to make that development fit with the regulations that are available.
But theoretically, there's limited discretionary uses. I could put a nightclub there.
Yeah, I'd have to look at there's quite a long list of permitted uses in the C1.
Other questions? What's that?
Make clubs as a bar.
That's my concern.
Okay,
It's discretionary.
Discretionary uses that can be used to expand those services that kind of fit in the area. But until we change the zoning surrounding that, I don't think spot zoning C1 is a good idea. Spot zoning a C4, I can live with.
other questions, comments, concerns? I'll just weigh in and say this. I'm 100% in favor of businesses expanding and growing. And I think that that's great for our community. I think it's great for residences. I think it's great for everyone. On the flip side, though, we have to be able to protect the areas where people live and how we separate those different uses. I have zero fear that this building in this particular use is going to have any issues now or into the future. However, with changing the zoning in this to C1, we no longer have any control over what goes there in the future. And so whether that's a year from now, 5 years, or 45 years from now, or 100 years from now, the people that live in that neighborhood will be left at the discretion of what we make the decision here today. And so knowing that, I totally am in favor of a C4 zoning because it gives a whole lot of control that any change in use, that there would be a mechanism to say, hey, yes, this makes sense to put it in the middle of a residential area. But in C1, as much as I want to say yes to business, I made a decision once in the past that I regretted, that we put in a residential area, and I told myself I would never do it again. And I have very few regrets on council, but that was one of them. I just can't do it. If there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion. Councillor Adams.
Geez, I go to make the motion. I don't even have it in front of me.
Page 6.
Thank you. Oop. Not on this one. Okay, I move that bylaw 18-2022 to amend the municipal land use plan map of the municipal development plan by designated plan 5521 KS block 11 lot 1 from residential and general urban to downtown receive second reading.
Call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? That is defeated. So we would not do third reading,
That's right.
but we would have to go into bylaw number 19, 2022. So bylaw number 19, 2022 is new report, along with the same pieces. Lori, do you have anything new to add?
Nothing more.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion. Councillor Adams.
I move that bylaw 19-2022 to amend the land use district map of the land use bylaw 222007 by redistricting plan 5521 KS block 11 lot 1 from R1 standard detached residential to district to C1 downtown commercial mixed use district receives second reading.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? That is defeated. So I would encourage there that there's a mechanism that's been set up with the fees there that the applicant reapply again, because I definitely think it's good for the neighborhood and I think it's good to see that business expand in the right box. We will jump now into page 62 in our package, which is the land use bylaw for number 22, 2007 for redistricting bylaw 1620, 2002. Lori, anything new to add on that one?
Nothing other than we recommend the bylaw receive second and third reading.
Any discussion on that one? Councillor Ward,
Yeah. I'll make a motion.
feel free.
That bylaw 16-2022 to amend the land use district map of the land use bylaw 22-2007 by redistricting plan 89-7 NY block 12 lot 19 from R1 standard detached residential district to R2 medium density residential district receive second reading.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Councillor Hughes.
I move that bylaw number 16-2022 to amend the land use district map of the land use bylaw number 22-2007 be redistricting plan 897 block 12 lot 19 from R1 standard detached residential district to R2 medium density residential district receive third reading.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That one is carried. Next is page 71 of our package. Bylaw number 17, 2022, and I will step out for this one.
Figure I would have paid attention to this a little better. All right, further discussion, any questions for Lori or anything to add, Lori?
Nothing other than we recommend second and third reading for the bylaw.
Comments, Councillor Ferguson?
I'll just make a motion. Move that bylaw number 17, 2022 to amend section 87.3 of the land use bylaw number 22, 2007 receive second reading.
Further discussion? I got one. Okay, there's a couple issues I have with the self-storage side of this. Being in the C1 district, what's already allowed in the M1 light industrial and also in business industrial zones throughout the town, which comprise a large majority of our land anyways. To bring this service to the downtown core does not seem to fit the overall vision of the community or the intent of the mixed use zoning. The intent of the downtown C1 zoning is to bring a mix of commercial businesses and residences together to promote a sense of neighborhood and revitalization in the area. Having a discretionary use for a storage facility above grade does not fit the vision of the area now or in the future unless we are going to have a broader discussion around the long-term vision of downtown Slave Lake and if we want to industrialize it more. We currently allow self-storage facilities below grade in C1 where the use may be supportive but not detrimental to the activity levels and use of the downtown. Using above ground locations using up above ground locations throughout the main corridor may have a lasting negative impact on the viability of our downtown retail businesses in the long term. What we want the downtown C1 to be a vibrant community supporting retail, the coffee shops and businesses that rely on foot traffic and creating that sense of community and everybody being together. And a self-storage facility does not bring this, and that is why it's zoned for the industrials, M1 and the business industrial. Thanks. Left that on.
Where I just point out, it's a discretionary use, right? So it goes to a regulatory body to make sure that it's fitting, the parameters of that neighborhood and that, or where it's going, that it would not adversely affect. So with that being said, because it is a discretionary use, I'd be in favor of it.
Councillor Ward.
Also, I know that from MPC, when we are looking at this particular location, the current portion of the yard is used by TELUS as parking. So currently it doesn't support any additional business usage. I find that this would be from the diagram, it's on the back end of the building. So it's not the building, the part that would be more facing into your downtown area. I'm a big supporter of additional businesses. I think because the storage is underground already, I don't think this would create a huge complication by having some of that part of the property. It's not it's standalone buildings per se, but it is not so far off of the current operation there. I think some flexibility here, like with, as Councillor Ferguson said, regarding discretionary use, I think in this location, it's fine.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Discussing it at MPC, there's already storage facilities underneath the building. I think having a ground level one actually is very makes sense for some people that live there, especially in terms of higher density or people with issues, mobility, et cetera, that can't get down to other storage units. I think it helped for people that just need the extra space, and I don't really see the issue with it here in this particular instance.
Again, though, we're talking about a zoning change, not a site-specific situation. So this could apply to any business along there to have that discretionary use. So to say that spot X can have this industrial use, yet, as we said before, the old Remax building or the Royal LePage building, in my backyard, why can't I have above ground storage there? It doesn't make sense to allow this or to bring a feeling of industrial storage to do whatever into a downtown atmosphere where we're trying to encourage people to move and to live. The below ground, I think, is adequate enough to allow storage for people who have residences. Having it in a yard doesn't make sense. You're talking TELUS has the yard there. That's used to be AGT and has been there since, I think, mid 60s, early 60s. So it's kind of hard to make that change. Any further comments? All right, call the question. Or I need a motion. Oh, the motion's on. Okay. Call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. And then you can tell Tyler
Third
to
reading.
come back in.
Third reading.
Oh, third reading. Oh, sorry, motion
No, it's,
17.
17-2022. Councillor Hughes.
I move that bylaw 17-2022 to amend section 87.3 of the land use bylaw number 22-2007 receives third reading.
Further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried.
Okay. We'll jump into page 77, our package defer offsite levies and developer contributions.
Mayor Warman. I'm going to be recusing myself for this, so please make notes in the minutes that I have a conflict.
Okay. Okay, Lori.
Okay, your worship and members of council, the purpose of this report is for council to consider a request Do you defer the payment of offsite levies and developer contributions, in this case intersection charges? The applicant is MKB Trucking, Mark Boissonneau. And the subject property is part of the Northeast 2572-6 west of the 5th, which is located south of Highway 2, adjacent to and east of the Sawridge Creek. And I believe I provided a location map for you on page 84. So a definition of a development charge are those costs assessed by the town of Slave Lake against land developers for their proportionate share of the costs of municipal infrastructure systems that are constructed by the town and benefit the development area. In the town of Slave Lake, development charges are comprised of offsite levies and developer contributions. Developer contributions exist for roads, some roads in the municipality, and all of the Highway 2 intersections within the town boundary. Development charge bylaw 2926, 2016 states council may by resolution in its discretion waive, change, or defer the development charge otherwise payable in accordance with the bylaw where the lots being developed are greater in size than would ordinarily be required for the use and purpose, or where the lands don't have municipal water and sewer facilities available, or for such other reason as council may deem appropriate. The development charges payable pursuant to this bylaw shall be paid by the earlier of the date of approval of a plan of subdivision by the town or issuance of a development permit, unless council has by resolution authorized payment at some other time and entered into agreement with the landowner to that effect. In accordance with the town's development charge policy, levies are annually adjusted. The subject lands are located in the south central area of the offsite levy study and are subject to the 2022 per hectare value. I haven't adjusted based on this year so far. So we're using the 2022 per hectare value of $14,501 per hectare. The subject lands on title show that there is 40.50 hectares of land. So multiply that by the per hectare value, come up with 587,290. Please note, these are significantly higher than the actual number would actually be once subdivision occurs. As we know, as the net developable lands are what the offsite levies are based on. So once the subdivision occurs on the lands, environmental reserves would be taken, municipal reserves would be taken, roads would be taken off, and then you'd be left with net developable lands. So it wouldn't be 50 or 40.50 hectares of land that the offsite levy would be based on. It would be significantly less, but of course, as a subdivision hasn't occurred, we don't know what the actual value would be. Developer contributions in this instance would be intersection charges for Highway 2, Highway 88 and Holmes Trail intersection. And they are based on the intersection charge study that was completed in 2009. And just for anybody, so everyone's aware, Alberta Transportation has indicated that municipalities in Alberta are responsible for costs to upgrade intersections required as a result of adjacent development. Essentially, as more development occurs adjacent to a provincial highway, that it will eventually result in upgrades to the existing intersection. And it may require new alignment, and it will definitely require signalization. So Alberta Transportation has indicated that those municipalities that have that growth are responsible for that cost. The 2022 per hectare rate for commercial lands is 34,172.56 per hectare and 11,390.85 for residential per hectare. And that the subject lands in the South Expansion Area Structure Plan have a portion in the front that are commercial and the portion in the back that are slated for residential development. So if we assumed roughly a 30-70% split, because again, subdivision hasn't occurred, you're looking at well over $800,000 in intersection charges based on the gross developable lands there, because again, subdivision hasn't occurred. So we don't know what's actually developable until a subdivision occurs. So a little bit of history. Prior to Mr. Boissonneau purchasing the lands, they were owned by the Sawridge Development Corporation. At one time in the 60s or 70s, N70s, Sarge operated a 9-hole golf course on the lands, on these lands and adjacent lands. There are no records of a development permit being issued for offsite levies having been paid because we lost our records in the 2011 wildfire. We do know that our first offsite levy bylaw was passed in 1985, and operation of the golf course ceased somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s. So the likelihood that they would ever have contributed offsite levies is almost nil, because the bylaw would have come into effect right near the end of the operation of the golf course. And then, of course, intersection levies weren't even contemplated back then, so they would not have been collected either. So Mr. Boissonneau purchased the property in February of 2021, and he proceeded to erect a fence. He did come in and talk to the planning department. I just wanted you to be aware of that. Those discussions did happen before development occurred. He then started cultivation of the land. We did reach out to him and indicate that he would need a development permit and to add some uses to the land use bylaw so that he could operate, and he did do that. Bylaw number 13, 2022 received second and third reading in November to add the uses he wanted. And then he applied for a development permit that was approved by the MPC on January 9th. What they approved at that time was the agricultural operation only. He is not applying for his hobby farm at this time. So during the discussion with Mr. Boissonneau back in November, I also advised him that because a development permit was being sought and issued, and the discussion of offsite levies had never taken place, I'm required under the bylaw regulations to have the discussion and bring the discussion forward to council. And when we discussed it, he asked that a report come before council to ask them to defer. So again, as the subject lands have yet to be subdivided and there are no new developments on the land since the operation of the golf course, the discussion of offsite levies has never taken place until now. There are no roads, no access. There are no water and sanitary sewer services. We haven't taken environmental reserves. We haven't taken municipal reserves with respect to the subject land. So we're talking about a raw, unserviced chunk. We have no idea what net developable lands is going to look like. And both the offsite levies and the intersection charges are based on not net developable lands and not on gross or raw land. Let me see what else I was going to say. So there's a couple of options here. Council could enter into an agreement with Mr. Boissonneau to defer the payment of the offsite levies into developer contributions until such time as an application comes forward. The problem with this one is that I don't have a value. All offsite levy agreements they contemplate a value when we take security for it. And it's not reasonable to put a value of 1.3 or $1.4 million. It's way higher, and ask him to put up security for that when it's based on gross land. Option 2 would be to require him to pay the offsite levies. But again, levies are supposed to be based on net developable land. So the amount we'd be asking for is so grossly exaggerated that we couldn't do that, in my opinion. And the third option is to defer the requirement without an agreement, because we don't have a subdivision and we don't know what that value is going to look like. He would be given a letter to that that would go on the land-based file, and upon application for another development or subdivision of any kind, we'd have to have the discussion again.
Okay. Questions, comments from council? Councillor Adams.
Just a quick one. What other situations do we have this in where we defer without security? Are there a bunch in town, or?
Well, have we deferred without security in the past? Is that what you're asking me?
Basically, yeah.
If we have a set amount of money, if we know what the net developable lands are and we know what the cost is, there has been deferral in the past, but always with an agreement and security. In a situation like this where it's raw land and we don't know what the net developable lands, we have done this in the past where council deferred it until the next application. Deferring does not put you at risk of not being able to collect, we have the discussion again upon receipt of the next development permit or subdivision application.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions, comments? Motion? Thoughts? Counselor Adams.
I move that council defer the required offsite levies and intersection charges for part of the northeast 2572 6 west of the fifth. Oh my goodness. Owned by MKB Trucking until such time as an application for development permit or subdivision is received by the town.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. We'll jump into the fire services annual report.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight to present our 2022 annual report on the Lesser Slave Regional Fire Services. So 2022, once again, proved to be a busy year. That's the theme that we've been saying for the last few years. We ended up with a total of 538 emergency calls region-wide. That's up 38 from last year, which was our busiest year to date. One thing that we're noticing as a trend is volunteerism is down across the region, and it's also a trend in North America. It's not just in Slave Lake or the MD. We're starting to find more and more challenges with recruiting firefighters and keeping firefighters for long term. Medical first response calls were up in 2021. Assisting AHS seems to become more of an ongoing, I'm not going to say issue, but we're seeing the call volume and the wait times start to be longer than they have in the past. Motor vehicle accidents, again, are our largest number of responses, with more traffic activity taking place in the entire region. Some of the goals for 2023 moving forward are to enhance our recruitment and training program, to enhance our mental health program and our, I want to say cancer program, not the exact term I'd use, but we're just working it out for long-term sustainability of our firefighters. Some of the projects we're working on, we have a new rescue truck that's being built that was approved last year. New rescue tools took place also in 2022, and they just finally got into the MD stations. And working on some training opportunities with local colleges and the surrounding areas. So some of the highlights of 2022, along with the calls, we had 772 station responses. So that's counting all the different stations and the number of times that they actually responded to calls. So, and again, the big responses were motor vehicle collisions and alarms, so residential, commercial, and then fires and medical responses. Some of the highlights that took place around the region, we got back into open houses. So we had open houses again in 2022, which we hadn't had since pre-COVID. We had over 700 guests visiting the fire halls for open houses and other public interactions. We did school tours, so 6 school tours for a total of 90 hours of firefighter hours. That's open houses, fire prevention week. We had 14 new members join in 2022, 9 in Slave Lake, 1 in Widewater, 2 in Smith, and 1 in Flatbush. Our in-house training that took place in all of our halls. So in Slave Lake was 1,700 hours. Widewater was 300, Smith was 200, and Flatbush was 280 for a total of 3,000 training hours across the region. Again, getting back into some of the post-COVID numbers where we were doing a lot of online or canceling training because of COVID. We held a bunch of courses, our basic and advanced wildland course that was developed through the Lesser Slave Regional Fire Service and Northern Lakes College. ACCO used the training center. We worked with Northern Lakes College for confined space. RCMP used the training center, WCSS, Western Canada Spill Services. And we also worked on our special teams in the training center. So that's one of the big focuses this year, is to get the training center back up and being used for what we originally had built it for. Training firefighters so that they go back to their communities and they're an asset to the communities that they serve in. So those are some of the highlights. Some of the other things we were participated in the Candy Cane Check Stop, the Christmas Toy Drive with AHS. We had one Fire Smart community event in Martin subdivision, for a total of 298 hours. We did hazard reduction burning for 65 hectares and mowing for 200 hectares. We did 15 boat patrols this year. And we worked on our wildfire pre-plans and pre-incident surveys around the town and the MD. So all in all, a busy year, and we had 4 months last year where we were responding to more calls than we had. January, September, October, November, December were all record months for us. So, and we're continuing to see that trend into 2023. Any questions?
Counselor Adams.
As always. Actually, you guys do a great job. It's great to have the service here and how responsive you guys are. Sometimes a little too responsive to my smoke detector, but you know. I see in the numbers here, you got rated from 2013 to 2022. We've almost doubled in our calls. Why is that?
That's a great question. Early on, we were not part of the medical first response program. We joined that program in, I believe it was 2019. So that we used to go to medical calls. We just weren't a part of a program. So it was more of a ambulance was on scene and they needed help or those types of things. Now we actually have a program. We respond to a certain type of calls. That increased our call volume by about 70 to 80 calls a year, where we went from about 10 to 15. We've also seen an increase in that because of the HS response times are down. They're struggling with some of their staffing issues and things like that. Martin Hills, the oil and gas is picked up after the fires in 2019 in McMillan. The log haul that was coming out of there with the burnt wood was lots of incidents on the highway. During COVID, we had lots of alarm calls from students being at home, people being home instead of being in school, being at work. So our daytime calls, we really saw an increase in that. Overall, there's a lot more things happening in our community. Our beaches are getting busier, our campgrounds are getting fuller on the weekends. We're just seeing a lot more activity in the region, a lot more guests and visitors coming here. We've noticed since COVID that our beaches and everything, like they're getting used more. So I think people have started to realize, hey, you can come 2 hours north or, a couple hours south and have this great place to visit. And so a lot more activity on the roads, a lot more things like that. And along with that comes medical calls and car accidents and that type of stuff.
Okay, other questions? Counselor Ward.
You mentioned that getting volunteer recruitment's an issue across North America, and obviously here we're not immune to that. What are you guys doing to help or other? But do you have any strategies or what are other departments doing?
So along in the region and in the province, and we're also part of the National Volunteer Board. Those are great questions. A lot of places are focusing. So there's a trend to start paying volunteers more than a check mark system, hourly wage, that type of thing. Once we get them, how do we keep them? So we show them the flashy red fire trucks, but that's not the reality of what we do. So we have to show them the realism of the job and give them the training to keep them there. What we're finding is we can get them in the door. We can get lots of people to come and see us, but once they realize the stresses of the job, that's when we lose them. So we're seeing recruit classes of 6-10 volunteers 3-4 times a year, but the reality is that only 3 or 4 of those people stay. They realize that we're asking a lot from people to leave things in the middle of the night, middle of the day. It's getting harder for people to leave work. Businesses their wallets are getting tighter and they can't afford to have employees leaving for 2 or 3 hours at a time, especially when you're going to 2 or 3 calls a day. When you're going to 250 calls a year, it's easy to let somebody go for an hour every 3 days. When you're going to 500 calls a year and letting them go for an hour twice a day, it's a lot harder to do. We're also seeing businesses that work on weekends and evenings versus Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. So it's harder to get people to respond to the hall at night on the weekends, where those didn't used to be problem times for us. So, and people's time is starting to become value to them. They want to go to the beach and spend the day at the beach, not worry about having to drop everything to run to the fire hall to do things most people don't want to do, quite frankly. So I don't have all the answers for you. It's an ongoing fluid problem. And every day we try to find new ways to do it. Giving them a t-shirt and a cup of coffee at the fire hall isn't working anymore. So we have to find new, exciting ways to keep them. And it's proven to be a challenge.
Thanks.
Other questions, comments? Counselor Hughes.
I would just make a motion. I move that council accept this report as information.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? It's carried. Alex, one thing for my own benefit for future years. You know, when you put in the incidents and so you got the total incidents for 2022, 538 and break it down, love it. Is there any way you could put the last couple of years beside it to show what it is?
Absolutely.
And because I think one of the things that council is really trying to keep an eye on, ask where is it all coming from or whatever else. But that medical piece is a very political piece for us in the sense that, we want to help out and we want to do our part there. But we need to keep an eye on how much of that overtakes what we're doing. So to be able to see that growth, be able to chart that, and when we're having our political discussions with our counterparts in health to say like, listen, this is what it's doing to us and what it's costing us. I think it'd be a good piece to have on there.
Yep. One thing we're also started tracking last year was number of responders during the calls. So whether it was 2 or 4 or 10 or 12. So as we gather that data over a couple of years, we'll have good data of time of day, number of volunteers, number of responders. So there's another thing we can add to the pot here fairly soon.
So could you do the breakdown for this data for the last 2 years before this or no?
For the response?
Yeah.
I could get that. I could send that out.
Can you send it out by email?
Yeah.
Just so we're having future discussions. I think
I can
a lot
send
of
that out.
discussions about what our role in health is.
Yep.
Okay, updated fire bylaw then on page 97.
So once again, thank you here to present a report to update the 2014 fire services bylaw. So the basis of the bylaw, it covers fire pits, responsibilities of the fire chief, responsibilities of the fire service. It outlines the regional fire service. One of the big updates in the new bylaw would be the lockbox program. So currently the lockbox program that we use in Slave Lake and the MD is covered under the Alberta Fire Code 2019 edition. The reason we added in the bylaw is we've been given a heads up that it potentially is going to come out of the Alberta Fire Code. Quite frankly, the reality is it's cheaper to put a lockbox on your building and put a key in it than for us to come and break the door or the window every time you get an alarms call. As mentioned, or sprinkler activation or something like that. So the program's already in place. We've been doing it for many years. A lot of the infrastructure is already there. The system is if you open a business or build a building that requires a lockbox, if you have access to the roof, if you have a sprinkler system, if you have an alarm panel, you come to the town office, you purchase a lockbox, you get the keys for your building, you mount the lockbox, we come and lock it. There's only a certain number of keys in the region. We get called to your building, we take the key out, open the building, do what we got to do, lock the key back up. Everything's good. I don't know why they want to take it out of the Alberta Fire Code. A lot of municipalities, City of Edmonton as an example, is putting in their bylaw to continue on with this program. We do not want to be responsible for broken windows and doors just to go to a false alarm on a smoke detector at 4 PM at a business that nobody's around. The other change to the bylaw is the updating the rates. So just bringing up the rates of the, standby fees for fire trucks, responses to alarms, those types of things to today's numbers, matching the Alberta Road Builders and current rates on some of the other stuff.
Okay, questions from council? Not a one. Motion. Councillor Adams, we are not getting paid per motion.
Why step up, people?
Okay,
Scrolling to find.
Move that council gives first reading to bylaw 032023 fire services bylaw.
any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? It's carried. Councillor Ferguson,
Just a point of procedure. Do we have to give a unanimous consent?
after the second one we do,
Okay, all right.
correct?
Because we're doing all 3 readings.
Yeah, we're doing all three. So there'll be an extra motion that we need.
Move that council give second reading to bylaw number 03/2023 fire services bylaw.
Any further discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That's carried. Motion for unanimous consent. Councillor Hughes.
Move that council give unanimous consent for bylaw 03-2023 fire services bylaw.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That's carried. Councillor Ward.
Which one?
No, there.
You do third.
Move that council gives third reading to bylaw 03-2023 fire services bylaw.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Okay. Page 115 in our package, the fire services agreement for the Sawridge First Nation.
I'll talk on this one. So the purpose of the support for council is to approve, excuse me, entering into a 5-year protection services agreement with Sawridge First Nation. Lesser Slave Regional Fire Service currently bills on a per service basis to Sawridge First Nation. In late 2022, the fire chief and CAO worked with Sawridge First Nation to draft an agreement for the purpose of simplifying the fire protection services to the Sawridge First Nation. This agreement saves administration time on both ends and allows for one annual billing process to take place rather than a per service call. In January 2023, the Sawridge First Nation approved the agreement via council resolution as attached. The final step is to have the fire services bylaw number 03-2023, which is brought forward today as well, approved and passed by the town of Slave Lake, and approve the Sawridge Slave Lake Fire Services Agreement as attached.
Okay, questions, comments? Councillor Graham.
Motion move to approve the Sawridge Slave Lake Fire Services Agreement between the town of Slave Lake and the Sawridge First Nation as attached.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. Raw water line document, page 127.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to review and approve the Slave Lake Regional Raw Water Line Agreement between the town of Slave Lake and the MD of Lesser Slave River. The raw water line was constructed in 2017 and provides an alternate intake of raw water to the town of Slave Lake from an access point in Widewater. This line also serves hydrants in Lesser Slave River number 124 and the Sawridge First Nation, providing fire suppression efforts in the areas within each of their boundaries from access point of the Widewater to the town. Over the past several years, an agreement for services of the raw water line has been drafted in a drafted state due to changes in administration. This has been a delayed process. During 2022 year, both the MD and the town of Slave Lake administration completed the process of drafting an agreement. The agreement was brought to the intermunicipal committee and reviewed on December 14th. It was then brought to Sawridge First Nation late in December 2022 for their review and input. Administration is still waiting to hear back from Sawridge First Nation in regards to their approval. Should there be any requested changes, the agreement would need to come back to council for review and approval again. However, administration does not foresee any changes being proposed and made the decision to bring this to council in an effort to expedite the process. Administration is now bringing the drafted agreement to council for review and ratification. Two options before you is to pass a motion entering into agreement as presented or to table the agreement for changes and direct administration to bring back at a later date.
Okay. Questions, comments? I see none. Councillor Adams.
I waited. Move to enter into the Slave Lake Regional Raw Water Line Agreement between the town of Slave Lake, the municipal district of Lesser Slave River, and the Sawridge First Nation, effective January 24th, 2023.
Any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? That is carried. We touched on correspondence earlier in the meeting and dealt with Mayor's Corner. So at this moment, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session. Councillor Hughes makes that motion. Any discussion?